and good evening, everyone. I think I should be happy that it's raining so much today, so people have nothing more to do apart from sit and listen to me, I guess. And I hope you find what I'm about to share interesting, irrespective of whether you're from Chembur, whether you're not from Chembur, we will have something for everybody in this walk. And that's what I love about it so much, that it's generally people who are from Chembur who seem more surprised about the information that I share compared to people from outside. Because if you're from outside, you kind of expect, like, you don't know anything. So you're bound to be surprised. But when you've spent all your life in a particular area like I have, and when you don't really fall on the conventional history and heritage circuit of the city, you don't expect much, which is why you're more surprised. I went through the list of attendees and I'm glad to see a lot of known names over there. So thank you for joining, and thank you to the others also who I'm not yet acquainted with. So let's get started with our Chembur chapters. Image that you see is very much AI generated, but all the information that I'm going to share with you is very much authentic, and it's not AI generated content. It is the culmination of a lot of research that we have been doing, me and the other people in Khaki who are from Chembur. So, irrespective of where you're joining us from this evening, whether you're physically in Chembur or in any other part of the world, I'm going to teleport you through time to explore sides of this suburb that you probably did not know existed until today. So let's get started. And we're going to go right back to the origin stories of Chembur. Um, you know, if you are fond of history or heritage and you attend a lot of walks in the city, be it Khaki or be it by anybody else, those walks largely focus on the area that you're seeing over here. So this is the Mumbai city district extending from Kolaba in the south to Sion and Mahim in the north. And this is where people generally define heritage as being present. In those walks, you will also be told that 250 years ago, Mumbai wasn't just an island, it was an archipelago of 7 different islands. And that 7 islands of Bombay, by the way, is only the tip of the iceberg. Because as you may realize, Chembur isn't anywhere on this map. You can only see a tiny little trace of the landmass where Chembur is situated, and that's on the northeastern corner of this map. If I were to zoom out into this little subsection of the city, this is what we have.
Wow.
That's the Mumbai metropolitan area at the turn of the 20th century. And you can see that while the 7 southern islands have been combined into a single landmass already, there are many other islands over here that you will no longer find on the map of Mumbai because they all have been joined into one mainland. And one of the largest of those islands that does not exist anymore is Trombay. And that is where I'm sitting today. Zooming into the island of Trombay, this is what we have. This is the earliest detailed map of Trombay Island. It dates back to 1860, and we got this from the online source of the US Library of Congress. In it, you'll see around a dozen or so villages as they then existed. Those of you who live in Chembur will easily be able to identify a lot of the present day neighborhoods in this map from 1860. And at around that time, the total population of all of these villages put together would not have even hit the 5 digits. Right now, Chembur, I think, has 7 to 8 lakh people itself. And speaking of where we are the northwesternmost village in the island of Trombay. You will see in this map that we had the water very close to us at one point in time. To give you an idea, today, if you're at, that is for those who are in Chembur, if you're at Fine Arts Society and you take the flyover over to the other side to Amar Mahal Junction, once that flyover would have led into this water. So Amar Mahal Junction was not solid land back then. That is our dividing line. That's about geography. Now let's go further. What does this have to do with Chembur? So, a lot of neighborhoods in the city are named after famous personalities. There are many named after plants or flowers or geographical structures. We have the privilege of being named after this variety of crab. So the name Chembur comes from a variety of crab called Chimbori. And our neighboring suburb shares in this heritage. So our neighbors are Kurla, of course. And while Chembur is named after Chimbori, Kurla is named after a variety called Kurli. Now, I am a vegetarian. I haven't sampled either of these, but I am told that you can still get them in the market somewhere. Of course, you can't go to Amar Mahal and fish for them anymore because the water does not exist over there. Now, interestingly, a lot of these places in Mumbai, a lot of the suburbs, as we call them nowadays, you can trace their recorded history back to this chronicle called Mahikavati Bakhar. And this was compiled between the 11th and 12th, and I think the 13th to 14th centuries. It ends over there. And it was compiled initially during the reign of a king called Bimbade, who had his territories around the North Konkan area, and his capital was a place called Mahikavati, which you and I today called Mahim. Now, Mahikavati Bakhar has a lot of things in it. It has a record of ancestries, socio-political stuff, events. But what's most relevant to us are the place names mentioned in Mahikavati Bakhar. All the stars that you see on this map over here are place names within Mumbai that you will find in this chronicle. And that also includes a lot of the villages on Trombay Island. So there were people in the village of Chembur back then. And of course, this village still survives now in the form of Chembur Kauthan. Moving on to on-ground proof of people being over here. So something like this, you probably see in museums when you go to places that are more famous for their history. But in the late 19th century, in the village of Vadavli, which for the locals, that's where Cubic Mall is located right now. There was an inscription found where you had the king Aparaditya I, who was from the Shilahara dynasty. There is a grant of his granting a garden as a place of worship, and that garden was located in Vadavli village. From that period, there is also an inscription, this stone slab, actually, the one that you're seeing, that was found in the BARC campus. And this essentially says that a king called Hambir Rao granted this land to one of his commanders. That was his prime minister, that's Ari Singh Ji Prabhu. And that tells us that, while it may not have been a part of a big city, human activity was very much thriving in Chembur even in those times. We move a little ahead in history. Now, when I say Dargah, what do you think first when it comes to Mumbai? You think of Haji Ali, right? Well, let me show you something. I'm back to this map of Trombay Island from 1860. The southernmost point of Trombay Island back then is labeled as Mosque at Peer Point. This is not the English word pier. It's Peer as in a Sufi saint. If you take a map from the 1930s, zooming into the southernmost point, it's properly labeled as Peer Pau's Dargah. Peer Pau was presumably a Sufi saint. We haven't found much information about him. But Peer Pau Dargah appears consistently in every map that we have found, right down until the 1950s. After that, it mysteriously disappears. Now, unfortunately, what was then a remote corner of Trombay Island is now the hub of all our heavy industry. You have all of the refineries over there, the power station over there, so it's restricted territory. We have no ways of properly determining what happened to Pir Pau's Dargah. However, if you pick up a Google Earth map from the present day, go approximately to that location of Pir Pau's Dargah and zoom in, you can still see an unlabeled structure over here. You can make out the square shaped structure, and this bit, to me, it kind of looks like the remnant of a dome or something like that. It is completely unlabeled, but the location perfectly matches. It is possible that these are the remains of what was once called Pir Pao's Dargah. And the name Pir Pao itself, many of you will know, survives to this day. So this long jetty that emerges from Mahul is today called Pir Pao Jetty. So that's where they got that name from. So we know that it was very much true. Now, moving one step forward in history. So in the 1490s, Vasco da Gama arrives in India. And over the next half a century, the Portuguese established their strongholds all over the western coast of the country, which includes these islands of Bombay. Their regional capital was, of course, in Vasai, where you have the ruins of the massive fort even today. And they had handed over these islands to different Portuguese noblemen or aristocrats. And the only record that we have is that Trombe Island was handed over to a person called Roque Tello de Menezes. And these people were called the Foreiros. Now, it wasn't just politics that they brought over here, the Portuguese. They also brought religion. So along with them comes Catholicism, and you have a lot of clergy who come down to establish churches in the territories that are held by the Portuguese. Trombe Island was no exception. In that first century of Portuguese rule, you had 3 churches that were established on Trombe Island. And to put that into historical perspective, that would make these churches around a century older than the Taj Mahal. I mean, everybody knows of the Taj, and yet nobody knows how old these churches are. So which ones are they? There are 2 of them, which are very much active churches even today. St. Sebastian in Maravli, St. Anthony in Manpur. But there is also a 3rd church that is right here, which would mean that it is at the peak of Trombe Hill, which is amongst the highest points in the Mumbai metro area. And that was once called Our Lady of Health. This church was abandoned at some point in history. We don't know why it was abandoned, but we do know that all the artifacts from the church were then moved to the church in Manpur. Unfortunately, Trombe Hill now is, of course, a high security area. You and I are not permitted up there. So we have no ways of determining how these ruins look like today. However, there is a record from the Thane District Gazette in the early years of the 20th century, where you had a young officer who went down to Trombe Hill and has noted it. So he says that there is a ruined church that he saw over there. It has a preserved body while the roof has already collapsed in. And the church is around 26 feet long. It's 14 feet wide, and it has ceilings of probably 19 feet. And then you have a pretty impressive archway at the gate of the chapel. There's a courtyard right outside it, and then there is a vicarage as well. That itself is quite a big building. So it's 42 feet by 25 feet, and again with a 19 feet ceiling. So this is it's a very dry technical record that he's left us, but it allows us to imagine what was over there. And in front of all of it, there was a circular pedestal with a wooden cross installed on it. We don't know. However, during the pandemic, these images cropped up on Google, and they were labeled as Our Lady of Health. They're no longer there. If you now Google Our Lady of Health, nothing really shows up. These images were there and they quickly disappeared. There are different accounts of whether these are actually from Trombe Hill or whether these belong to the ruins of a church from Uran. But going by the description that I told you, this is a pretty nice fit, even if it is not the exact church. So it allows you to imagine how it may be today. If anybody attending over here has access to Trombe Hill, please let us know. We'll be very happy to go there and check it out. Moving on to another place of worship. So while Our Lady of Health was abandoned a long time ago, this structure is not yet abandoned. So it would technically make it the longest still inhabited structure on Trombe Island as a whole. So this is, for those who are not from the area, this is the Bhulingeshwar temple. That structure right behind, towering over it, is the Chembur monorail still be living in Chembur, and they don't really step into it because it is completely hidden by the buildings on either side. Unless you really step into the complex, you don't notice it. But once you do step in, it's like you're transported to a small village somewhere in the Konkan. So there are 6 shrines over there. And this temple, it dates back to 1764 as per the trust's records. It says that there was a person called Krishnaji Arun Somvanshi, who was the one who got this temple built way back then. And it's the SKP community who supported it. That's the Somvanshi Kshatriya Padhare community. There is a conservation architect called Rahul Chemburkar, and he a couple of years back restored this temple. So it's in a very good condition. If you're in Chembur and have never seen it or want to see it, please come down and have a look at it. It's quite a little oasis over here. And that was for our origin stories. Now, moving to the 19th century, this was a time when British imperialism would peak, when their colonial rule in India reached maturity, when their ambitions were growing, and consequently, the city of Bombay was also growing. It wasn't just a small little center. It would, between the start and the end of the century, completely transform, roughly into the shape that you recognize the city center today. So there were a lot of very ambitious schemes that were imagined during this era, many of which never saw the light of day just because of how crazy they were. Some of them did, and we still benefit from it today. The most important one, you could say, is the Trombay Island Causeway. If you remember what I've been telling you, Trombay was an island. And until the 19th century, there was no way to get to Trombay Island apart from by boat. If you were in the vicinity of what's Sion nowadays. In the initial years of the 19th century, you had the first road connectivity between the original 7 islands and what is over here, Salsette Island that comes up. And you can see that it's labeled Duncan Causeway. This part over here is Kurla roughly, and then you have Chuna Bhatti labeled over here. And then in 1846, you have a second causeway that's built from Chuna Bhatti across the marshlands, entering Trombay Island over here. So these 2 road connections essentially meant that Trombay was no longer cut off from the rest of the urban scheme that was happening. All the fruits, all the veggies, and all the produce from Trombay Island, people also, of course, could now more safely go across to the other islands in the Bombay area. And surprise, surprise, the traces of Duncan Causeway and the Trombay Island Causeway still survive today, hidden in plain sight. This is a present day map of the same area. What you see over here in blue, now this is, you're going from Science Circle, which is further down there. You're going towards Chunabhatti on the Eastern Express Highway. So this is now the Eastern Express Highway. That's the road that we take. And this is the road that's running parallel to the Eastern Express Highway. It's a service road now. So that's Duncan Causeway there. And then right over here, ending at Suman Nagar, is the Trombay Island Causeway. It's still a part of the modern road that runs parallel to the Eastern Express Highway around Everard Nagar, to give you a rough estimate, from Everard Nagar till Priyadarshini. That's an old photo of how Duncan Causeway would have looked. It's an undated photo. And that's how it looks now. And that's why you haven't been able to figure out that this was once a causeway, a kind of a bridge connecting 2 land masses and not just another suburban road in the city. So around the time when this was being developed, or slightly after this, there were many other crazy schemes that were dreamt up for Trombay Island. There's a book called Bombay Imagined by Robert Stephens. In that, he's compiled a lot of infrastructure projects that never saw the light of day. And he mentions that, now you have Vihar Lake. Lakes filling up is a major topic of discussion now in the rains. So before Vihar Lake was dug up, one of the proposals was also to clear up the top of Trombay Hill and have a Trombay Hill reservoir. There was another plan to build a seawall from Mahul Jetty cutting across all the way to Mazgaon so that all the marshlands behind it can be dried up and then developed into a new port area, which would mean that this whole place around Bhakti Park and Ajmera Island would have then been a part of that reclamation, but none of it ever saw the light of day. The next important pit stop, now we're inching towards the 20th century. There was a study of malaria conducted on Trombay Island. I think it's 1902, if I'm not mistaken. And the objective of it was not just curiosity, it was also to see what areas of Trombay Island would be suitable for further development. Now, what they found is that the incidence of malaria was highest in the shadow of Trombay Hill. Firstly, because you had one narrow strip of land where BARC now stands, which is behind Trombay Hill. And since that was protected from sea breezes, it was a breeding ground for mosquitoes over there, stagnant water and all of that. And the further away you went from Trombay Hill, the more hospitable the environment got. And around the villages of Charai and Chembur, which is where we are now, the incidence of malaria was very low. And it was observed over there that, while this is a good area from a health perspective, we don't really see any potential for it because Trombay is so far away from the main city. Who's going to come over here and build anything? So that scheme just lies over there for another 2 decades. Wait for it. Interestingly, just a side note, there was an area on Trombay Island that had a lower incidence of malaria than even the villages of Chembur and Charai. And that was what was then called the Municipal Refuse Depot, which is now the Devnar dumping ground. That had the lowest malaria incidence because they found that there is no tree, there is no field, there is no hill for shade in that area. And in that harsh sunshine, this incident is the lowest. But of course, they brushed it off saying that practically speaking, nobody is going to come over there and develop a suburb because the garbage dumping ground was already taking shape. Moving on to our next section. I've intentionally chosen this title because of what we're about to cover. And for the locals, that image in the background, that grainy black and white image is not AI generated. That's a picture of Diamond Garden once upon a time. And of course, you will know that it looks quite different today than it does in this picture. So why this curious title then? So in 1920, there's a lot of things that have now happened in Bombay in this intervening period. We will not dwell into that. Otherwise, this is going to be a 4-hour-long talk. There is a new municipal body, or rather a quasi municipal body that comes up called BDD, which is Bombay Development Department. If that name rings a bell, it is because you've seen these BDD chawls in Worli, very uniform looking structures. Now, this was not the only mandate that BDD had. They were also entrusted with the back pay reclamation scheme, which ultimately gave us Marine Drive. And there was another scheme that they were working on, a new residential scheme. So there was a thought that the BDD guys had. They said that the people of Bombay are very content living in their small little accommodations. Why not create a whole new category of suburbs for them that is just outside the city limits, which was then Sion and Mahim. It has low density housing, individual houses surrounded by a lot of greenery, but is still within commuting distance of the city. And that scheme was called the Garden Suburb Scheme. And to quote one of the newspaper reports of that time, Chembur was the Cinderella of the Garden Suburb Scheme. It was literally, we were the place where everything related to the scheme was experimented on. And you see the benefits of it even today. So let's dig deeper into this aspect. You remember this malaria study that said that while incidence is low, there is nothing really worth exploring here because it's so far away. Something had changed in these 2 decades, and that something were the railways. Around 75 years after railway came to the rest of what is now the Mumbai metro area, it finally entered Trombay Island in the 1920s. So that made commuting easier than it was before. We have a map over here. You can see the Kurla Trombay railway line marked running in a straight line cutting across. But what you also see is a second railway line over here, which is labeled the Kachra line. So what is now Harbour Line from Kurla to Mankhurd, which was being touted as, the foundation around which a whole suburb was to be built. This railway line was never meant to cater to passengers in the first place. It was meant to ferry the city's garbage all the way from the city center down to the Devnar dumping ground. So a stinky train with the city's garbage would start from Mahalakshmi and make its way slowly and steadily through the suburbs, which were vast open areas at that time, enter Trombay Island and make their way towards Devnar. In 1924, GIPR, the predecessor of Central Railways, decides to convert this Kachra line into a passenger railway line. And Chembur finally has a railway station. Kind of one of the primary reasons why people would want to move over here. People talk about marketing campaigns and a marketing blitz. Chembur experienced that in 1924-25. Pick up any newspaper from this period. Every single weekend, it's packed with these ads about the garden suburb scheme. And it's appealing to people's psychology. Do you live in crowded Bombay because you want to or because you have to? I think the answer to this, even today, if you were to pose this question, a lot of people would respond to it. They appeal to everything from, making Chembur a place where you can park your retirement savings, to appealing to the sense of pride that somebody will have in being a homeowner instead of a tenant. And the call to action was, why don't you come down to the garden suburbs and check out one of these plots that we have for you and have a look at the cost of housing over here. Really pinches you to see the rates today and the rates back then, does it not? So practicality was not far behind. Where you had the garden suburb scheme developing these suburbs, you had the state aided building scheme as a way of financing people's ambitions to build a house in these new garden suburbs. Imagine this. You see these ads from builders like Loda or Kalpataru in the papers nowadays. This is not a private builder. This is the government promoting a new neighborhood, a new set of neighborhoods, and the government giving you financial incentives to go and buy a plot of land over there and build your house. It tells you that there's a land manager over there, and there's a lot over here. They even employ what would then be called what would now be called influencers to convince people to come and buy a plot of land. So yeah, that was how the modern suburb of Chembur started developing. And who were the people who came here then? I'll come to that slide later. So one of the largest purchasers of land in this newly established garden suburb was a Catholic Welfare Association. The picture is AI generated. The headline is not. That's an actual newspaper snippet from 1925, where community members gathered at the Gloria Church in Baikala and laid the foundations of what is now St. Anthony's Homes Cooperative Housing Society. If you live in what is the core garden suburb, so to say, this society still lends a very distinct visual and cultural character to the neighborhood of Chembur. And of course, because they're coming and investing in land so much, you can't just welcome them to nothing, right? You need to show them something. And to substantiate its scheme, the BDD construct a series of model cottages in Chembur. These are actual photos of bungalows that were erected in the Chembur garden suburb back then. So depending on your budget, you could take anywhere from a shared cottage over here or an individual cottage, or going all the way up to a huge mansion for the princely sum of 42,000 rupees. And they would all come to the estate office, as it was called. And after they surveyed the plots of land, they would come to the estate office, see the blueprints, and then, if they're convinced, book a plot of land for themselves. That is how the entire operation was carried out. Now back to the society. So when they purchased these 100-odd plots of land, their ambition was to develop a community that would take care of your needs from the womb to the tomb. This is how one of the pioneers of the society put it in his autobiography. His name was Aloysius Suarez. He was a lecturer. He was a nationalist as well, and he was the reason why the Chembur Garden suburb developed the way it did, one of the pioneering members. And the house that he constructed over here for himself and his family still stands over here, very close to OLPS Church. It's a cottage called Belvedere. I'm sure people in Chembur know of this. Even if you don't know of it by name, you can see it and recognize it. It's still in a very good condition. I guess it's now almost 90 years old, if I'm not mistaken. It's still within the family. Mrs. Frida Suarez lives over there, and Rahul Chemburkar, who I mentioned earlier, the conservation architect. A couple of years back, he has helped her restore the bungalow, and it looks really pristine now. So kudos to keeping this heritage like it was intended 90 years back. So this is the picture of Belvedere that we found online. There's no credit. I mean, it's just from a Facebook page that we came across that somebody had posted it. Very recognizable even now. So that's Central Avenue Road, by the way, in front. For those of you in Chembur, you can see that it's not a big 4-lane road with broad footpaths. It's a tiny little country road with vegetation growing all around it. But what about this makes it a garden suburb? You know, that was a very specific term that was used. For that, you need to go to the backyard of Belvedere and peek into it and see what's over there. So let me show you a glimpse of that. So that's what exists behind the cottage. It's a lot of green space. It's when you look at the backyard is when you realize that the cottage is a very tiny part of the entire plot of land. And it wasn't just aesthetics. The rules that the BDD had put in place for the garden suburb in those early years dictated that you could only develop around 25% of your plot of land. And this 75% that was left open, you could do what you want with it. A lot of people would have chosen to make it into a kind of a kitchen garden because Chembur was still quite far away from civilization, so to say. So you needed to be self-sufficient in terms of what your house was producing. While all of this sounds very idyllic, when you move on to 26 to 29, its headlines have changed. Chembur is now called a failure because while the government really over promoted it, they never invested in building the infrastructure on the ground. There wasn't even a pakka road in this garden suburb. It was just mud, which you can imagine in a rain like like it is right now, it would have just become slush. It would have become a breeding ground for infectious diseases. Electricity was not even there in Chembur until the 1940s. So we were not really welcoming people to anything great over here. You see this bit about passengers and acrobats, it sounds like a present day headline. But the context of this was that while they created Chembur Station, there was no Chembur Station platform. So the train just stood over there and it was up to you to climb up and climb down from the train to the ground level. But there was something going on in the country that would shift the focus of the headlines about Chembur, and that was the freedom struggle. In the early 30s, irrespective of how good you are in history, you will remember that this was a time of the Dandi March, the Salt Satyagraha. You had the civil disobedience movement pick up in that decade. And you've obviously never read of Chembur as a part of this entire movement. But remember that this was salt producing area. They had a lot of salt pans on Trombay Island and in the neighboring area, which was Badala. I don't know whether you saw this teaser that we had used for this talk, but Trombay salt way back when, Trombay salt was considered a premium quality salt and it competed in the markets of Bombay Fort with Matunga salt as the two premium varieties of salt. So when salt is so integral to you, obviously you're going to be a part of the salt satyagraha. So headlines from this time speak about freedom fighters being jailed. They speak about people being assaulted even during non-violent processions. And the goal was twofold, of course. It was salt satyagraha, but it was also boycotting foreign goods. It was also a temperance movement, that is a movement against consumption of alcohol. So there were a lot of these pickets going on, and this is when you start hearing names like uh, N.G. Acharya, V.N. Purav, the Matres, the Rautes, the Chemburkars. All of them are very frequently cited. These are families that are still living in Chembur, as locals would know. There was one case, though, that captured public imagination during this time, and that was a case of Emperor versus Sakina Bai Lukmani. Now, Sakina Bai was a 65-year-old lady who lived in Chembur. Her husband had a thriving medical practice in the city, and she was very big in this entire movement. Primarily, she used to picket outside liquor shops. So she used to stand a safe distance away from these shops. And rather than physically blocking access to the shops, she resorted to moral persuasion, like telling people of how bad alcohol is for you. One of the most memorable taglines from that time of this movement was a banner that said, Daru Manushyala Pashu Banavite. For those of you who don't understand Marathi, alcohol makes a human into an animal. That's what it means. So on one such ticket that she was holding outside a liquor shop, she was arrested and she was taken to the court at Kurla and she was found guilty. Now, it's a non-violent protest. She has not physically harmed anybody. She has not blocked access. Still, the judge thought it suitable to sentence this 65-year-old lady to 4 months of rigorous imprisonment. And she was categorized as what was called a B class prisoner. And people were really outraged about it. You know, this is a respectable lady. Her husband is a doctor. She's a old lady. She has not really done anything violent. And this is what you sentence her to. So her daughter, Shamina, she was a part of an organization called the Desh Sevika Sangh. And Ms. Shamina then organized a massive protest where you had hundreds of women participating in it that started from Mandvi and went all the way to what is now Azad Maidan, demanding that Sakina Bai Lukmani be released from her sentence. And it went up to the Bombay High Court, where Justice Madgaonkar, while presiding over the case, said that it just seems like a vindictive sentence. There is nothing in what she has done that deserves a sentence like this. Uh, Sentiment was also very strong because apparently she fell sick when she was in jail because of the conditions over there. And Justice Padgaonkar said that, you know, such sentences, they don't uphold the law. They just undermine the law because they make people think less of you. So he finally then struck down the decision of the Kurla court and released her. And I've not put any headlines over here, but this is one case which for a period of quite a few months has like half a page coverage, front page coverage in a lot of newspapers of that era. And this commitment to the freedom movement continues all throughout the 1930s. Um, but then in the 40s, something else comes up. That is the Second World War and subsequently the partition of the country. I don't have an image, so I will speak about one part of it. So during the Second World War, the government had procured a large tract of land, again close to Vadavli village, for the establishment of military barracks. Now, these were barracks that were meant for soldiers of what was called combined operations. So these were European soldiers, and they were brought to Bombay kind of as a temporary posting. This was not their destination. They used to come to Bombay and then they used to wait for extended periods of time for their subsequent assignment, wherever that may be. And they were then, imagine these young British guys who had not really seen the world and they were landing in Bombay. And the visual assault, the olfactory assault, it was a little too much. So we came across the diary of a soldier who speaks about his time over there. He says that, you know, while physically there wasn't much of discomfort, it was psychological torture to be over there not knowing where we are going to go next. He says that, you know, it was hot, it was humid, and their barracks, they had a charpoy, and of course, they had paraffin-filled tins to keep the mosquitoes at bay. But what many of these soldiers experienced for the very first time was the injustices of colonialism. They realized that under this colonial system, even the most undeserving of whites had to be waited upon by the locals because that is what the system demanded. So this soldier speaks of what was called the camp's Johnny. And this Johnny was supposed to be their chai wala. He extended credit to them if they needed it or helped them out with any random errands. So the soldier speaks about visiting the Johnny's house after being invited for dinner. And he witnesses grinding poverty over there. And amidst that grinding poverty, the warmth and hospitality of this family, who knows that they will never reach the same station in life as he will, irrespective of how hard they work, just because the system is rigged against them. And that leaves a lasting impression on his mind. We don't know what happened to that soldier later on in the war, but this is quite a poignant account that he leaves of his time in Chembur Camp. And later, a couple of years later, when the partition happens, Chembur Camp, which housed the soldiers of the Second World War, now becomes a refugee camp for the refugees coming in from Sindh. After Ulhasnagar, Chembur Camp was the largest camp for Sindhi refugees. As you can imagine, conditions in a refugee camp were less than ideal. So the papers of this time call for calm, they call for orderliness, they call for people to be patient. And you had a lot of dignitaries of that time visiting Chembur Camp to hear out the grievances of the refugees over there to see whatever is possible. So you can see the headline down, Lady Mountbatten coming down to Chembur Camp. And the locals know this, the outsiders may not. Chembur Camp still survives to this day, but it has a different avatar, of course. What once served as the barracks for soldiers from the Second World War and Sindhi refugees is now a hub for food. So you have a lot of influencers that you will see who come down to Chembur Camp, a lot of Bollywood celebs swearing by some of the outlets over there. So if you haven't yet gone to Chembur Camp, please do. It's quite a nice place. A very interesting story from around this time. So very close to Pir Pao Dargah on the southernmost tip of Trombay Island was another place called Sando Castle in these old maps. And Sando Castle, much like Pir Pao's Dargah, disappears after the 1940s and 50s. It has a very fancy name and a very intriguing story behind that fancy name. And it has to do with this person. So his name was Eugen Sando. He was born in what was then called Prussia, which is present-day Germany. And he was a Pehelwan. That's the best way to explore. And he became very, very, very popular in India. There are masses who welcome him at Howrah station when he arrives over here. So Eugen Sando's benefactor was a Parsi merchant called Dhanjibai Bamanji, who most of the times lived in London. And it is said that Eugen Sando cured Dhanjibai Bamanji of elephantiasis. And he was forever grateful to him. Apparently, Eugen Sando claimed that Dhanjibai Bamanji then left him a bungalow that overlooked the sea very close to Pier Point, and said that if he ever wants to come down to India and settle, then Sando Castle is his and for his descendants as well. So around 1947, there was Sando Castle was being sold off. And one of the potential buyers of Sando Castle was Muhammad Ali Jinnah. He was very interested in procuring that property. Fortunately, partition happened, so that sale never took place. We don't know what happened to Sando Castle. But Yugat Sando's legend actually lives on. Men in India are no strangers to a garment called Sando Banyan, which is the sleeveless banyan. Now you know where the name Sando Banyan comes from. It owes its origin to a Persian Pahalwan called Yugen Sando. Changes were coming very quickly to Bombay. I know that we are running short of time, so I'll try not to overrun it. After independence, the city limits of Bombay were expanded, which was once only up till Mahim or Sion. Subsequently, within the span of a decade, would extend to the present city limits. And along with this expansion of city limits also came better infrastructure. One of the biggest beneficiaries of better infrastructure was the film industry. Of course, all of you know of RK Studios, whether you're from Chembur or not. And as much as for films, RK Studios was also famous for their holy parties, for their Ganesh Chaturthi celebrations, which went on until recently. And they weren't the only movie studios over here. You also had studios like Asha, Basant, Jagriti, Bharat Movie Tone, all of which went defunct over the next couple of decades. But in that short span of time in the 40s and 50s, Chembur really was what Bandra or Lokhandwala is today. Um, and one of the reasons was that these places were very quiet back then, and the technology of the time wasn't as advanced as it is now. So if you have to shoot a film even indoors, you needed silence. So these places offered that silence that people wanted. Um, I will come back to this video a little later. I'm going to show you, I'm going to move on to the 1950s. So this was when um, things were changed for Chembur. What was once a quiet suburb would no longer be so because a series of schemes were being launched by the government. So in 1954, in what was remote forested land in Trombay, AEET gets established. That's the full form is Atomic Energy Establishment Trombay. You and I know it as BARC. So you have the first reactor of independent India, Apsara, that gets inaugurated in 1957. Now, the land that was chosen was a secure land, which that malaria study long back had identified as the most thriving spot for malaria because it was in the shadow of Trombay Hill. Fortunately, being in the shadow of Trombay Hill worked out because this was a sensitive establishment and the hill could protect it. At around the same time, on the other side of the hill, you had two petroleum refineries that came up. Esso Standard set up its refinery and quickly followed by Burma Shell, companies that you know of as HPCL and BPCL today. Shortly thereafter, in 1962, comes Rashtriya Chemicals and Fertilizers. So within the span of one decade, this vast expanse of Trombay Island, which was densely forested area, becomes one of the most heavily industrialized in all of Mumbai. Land is also now marching on. It's not just industries. So reclamation is central to the story of our city. And while you had the core garden suburb over here, there was a new kind of neighborhood that the government envisioned. This was to address the critical shortage of housing in post-independence India, and it was supposed to be low-cost housing. So until that point, again, AI generated image, the garden suburb would have been a quite idyllic little place, maybe a car going past once in a blue moon. And you suddenly had truck after truck filled with earth trundling down that same set of roads, going towards the edge of what now are roads 11, 12, 13, 14, 16, and the close by areas to dump earth into the marshland that existed over there. The result of all of this was the creation of a whole new neighborhood called Subhash Nagar, which used to be marshland previously. So there are still people who live in Chembur who remember the times before Subhash Nagar existed, where it was marshland, a tidal marshes back there. And Subhash Nagar, of course, very different from the previous garden suburb. It's not bungalows, it's not cute little cottages, it's high density, low cost housing. So it gave a very different character to this neighborhood. And the central Maidan of Subhash Nagar, which you can see over here, would come into the spotlight 3 decades later, which we'll soon address. Around this time, we are going back to the Catholic community just for a short while. In the center of that neighborhood, you have in 1959 OLPS Church getting inaugurated. For the decades before that, there was no church that that community had. It finally came up only then, and you had the Archbishop of Bombay and the governor of Bombay State who came down to inaugurate OLPS. That's a picture of how OLPS looked way back in 1962 versus present day. Looks still the same. It's just the neighborhood around it that's changed. Of course, we have a walk in Chembur called Chembur Charcha where we speak a lot more about OLPS. But now we'll go on to our next chapter. Now, by this time, of course, Chembur was no stranger to migrations. You had the refugees coming in the 1940s. You had all the families who moved into Subhash Nagar in the late 1950s. And then in the 60s, you had a new wave of migrants, which were South Indians, predominantly Tamilians, coming in to the suburb and populating it. Now, South Indians first came to Bombay in large numbers a couple of decades back in the 30s, and Matunga was their primary home. So these were children who were second generation migrants, people who may have lived in Matunga already. They were growing up, they were all grown up and they were keen to establish their own nests. And Chembur presented cheap land in large quantities for this precise purpose. Yet again, you have a change in the urban architecture, AI generated image, but this is how I remember pre-redevelopment Chembur as being even in the 90s. You had ground plus two buildings that were built way back in the 60s to roughly mirror the architecture of what these people had seen in Matunga and the areas around that. Uh, Still large numbers of this community, of course, living in the core of the garden suburb. And they didn't just bring themselves, they also got culture with them. So in 1962, a bunch of eager volunteers gather in a garage on what is now 15th Road and form the Fine Arts Society to promote classical arts and culture in the suburb of Chembur. Initially, they did not have any permanent place. They just kept meeting in places like these. But they did, for a long time, have a fundraising function. Representative image again for you. Um, so this function would have been held in what is now called Gandhi Maidan, and you had a huge shamiana being erected over there. You had several categories of seating depending on what you could afford. And this wasn't just casual entertainment. You had classical arts like Bharatnatyam, you had Mohiniyattam, Kathakali, all of these dance forms and eminent performers of all of these dance forms coming down over there. You had classical singers who have come down also. So MS Subbalakshmi has come down uh, to this fundraising event. And there is, we spoke to a local resident who recalled that, in one such fundraising event, the stage actually caught fire and MS Subbalakshmi had to be rushed off the stage to prevent a disaster from happening. Imagine that. Finally, though, much later in 1993, Fine Arts manages to get its permanent home, and the Fine Arts Society still exists today, right next to the monorail station across the Bolingeshwar temple. You can still go there for a bunch of lovely programs, and it all started as fundraising events and in a garage on 15th Road. Around this time, you have the core garden suburb down here. And in what was marshlands until then, you had a whole new neighborhood come up called Chedanagar. It still exists today. Again, a very South Indian dominated neighborhood. And right in the center of this neighborhood is perhaps a temple like no other. So this is the Murugan temple at the core of Chedanagar. And I'll tell you why it's unique. So firstly, the sheer care that went into the construction of this temple. So you have a 4.5 feet idol that came down from Tamil Nadu all the way. You have the Utsav Murti that was made with Panchaloha. You had craftsmen who had come down from Swami Malai down south. The sculptor of the main idol, he was one of the instructors at the Sculpture Institute in Mahabalipuram. And altogether, you had 50 artisans come down from South India and a total of 800 tons of granite that was got down from Mahabalipuram to Mumbai for the construction of this temple. And I kind of call this the Amar Akbar Anthony of temples because here you have a South Indian Hindu temple where the chief architect was Christian and the contractor was Muslim. So all three communities actually came together for this temple. And I'll tell you one more interesting fact. So this is a Murugan temple, and ideally Murugan temples are located on a hill. There is no hill in Chedanagar because it's reclaimed land. So in true Mumbai fashion, Jugaad, you need to climb 108 stairs from the entrance of the building to actually get to the temple right at the top. All of this is just administrative offices and halls. So you have the traditional way being preserved in a modern city on reclaimed land for this temple. So that's a kind of innovation that only Mumbai can do, I feel. Moving on from one religion to another religion, and that's our national religion, I'll say, which is cricket. Remember the Subhash Nagar Maidan that I told you about a couple of slides ago? in the late 80s and early 90s, that was home to a whole new kind of attraction, which was the Raj Kapoor Memorial Cricket Tournament. So Raj Kapoor had passed away in 1988, and it was Mithun Chakravarti who came up with this idea of a neighborhood cricket tournament in Subhash Nagar Maidan. So you had young people from different parts of Mumbai who came down over here for cricket that was held at night and played using a tennis ball. A very rudimentary infrastructural arrangement, but that did not stop the who's who of Bollywood and cricket of that time to come down and attend this reputed tournament. I remember this happening in the early 90s. It did not survive the 90s. It shut down later, but still some fond memories of it. Now we move on to the final chapter of our walk, uh, the changes in the suburb. The picture that you see again here is not AI generated. This was a very impressive house that stood right here in Chembur. For locals, this was on Central Avenue. And the Baptista family had constructed this house, if I'm not mistaken, in the early 30s. Sorry if I'm getting that fact wrong. And this was one of the first structures to be redeveloped in the early 90s. Interestingly, a part of the structure still stands because in its early avatar, redevelopment did not involve demolishing the entire structure and reconstructing. You literally built above the existing structure. And thankfully, Anchorage, as the house was called, they did it in such a way that the bungalow original structure still survives as an HDFC Bank branch on the ground floor with the rest of the building taking shape above it. Of course, subsequent redevelopments have been far less forgiving. Um, Now, this is not the trend, so a lot of things keep disappearing. Where do we stand today with Chembur? It is kind of the poster child again. Once again, it's finding itself as a poster child of real estate development in the city. A lot of changes happening over here. You know, once upon a time, we had a lot of bungalows that were in a style that we call the vernacular style. Some of them still stand today. It was also a unsuspecting hub of what is called Art Deco architecture. For those who are unfamiliar with it, Art Deco is the style that you see in Marine Drive. I won't go into too many details about it. Many of these structures have also gone. And even in my childhood, I remember that a lot of these old houses had been abandoned or were in a very bad condition already. We used to have a little challenge as kids as to who can enter these booth bungalows after dark and take a chakkar around that building. Fact of the matter is that these are private residences. People who own them, they face an uphill struggle to maintain them. Um, Succession becomes an issue, and in the lack of any other incentive to help keep these houses, there is no motivation, and that is completely understandable. So, let's not begrudge any decisions that they make. And while these houses still exist, we admire them. Once they are gone, we cherish them in our memory. There are still some remnants of Chembur that will hopefully stay with us, just like this little slice of Chembur Kauthan, which continues practically unchanged from all those years back. That brings me to an end of our talk called Chembur Chapters. I'm sorry for exceeding my time. But yeah, that's it from me. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and let's have some questions if you guys are up for it.
That was amazing. That was truly just a whole lot of fun, that talk. And that's in all the comments as well. There's lots of, whoa, I didn't know, wow, amazing, in all the comments. But there are a couple of questions. I've sifted through all the comments. One was that about the two crabs right in the beginning. Uh, were there two varieties of crabs, or was it just two names for crabs?
Two varieties of crabs,
Two
Chimbori and
varieties.
Kurli.
Okay.
Again,
Uh,
I'm vegetarian's perspective, but non-vegetarians have told me that yes, these are indeed varieties of crab.
Okay, cool. Then there was just another question about when the Diamond Garden was built.
See, there is, if you see some of the oldest maps also, there is a circle
Mm,
demarcated over there for a garden. But
mhm,
I think formally as a garden, it only got laid out in the 1960s. Before that, it could have just been a circular plot that was lying undeveloped.
mm. Okay. Someone was asking about any famous food places in Chembur that you could recommend.
I don't think you even need me from that. You just put in Chembur food, you will get a lot of recommendations over there on Google. I think it's the most popular topic when it comes to Chembur now, which is
Okay.
specifically why I have focused on history and not food.
Okay. Any like who's who from Chembur?
Yes, in fact, I had one video that I skipped about the who's who of Chembur.
Hmm.
Perhaps once you've taken up the other questions, I can play that video.
Sure. Sure. We'll do that. And do any of the new redevelopment buildings, are they trying to keep the old facades, the Art
I
Deco
have not seen
facades?
any. See, the only thing I've seen is with RK Studios because it was such an iconic structure. Godrej, when they took it over, they retained the entrance, the gate with
Mm-hmm.
the RK logo on it. But that's about
Hmm.
it. I
Okay.
think after the 90s, the system of retaining the original structure and building on top of it, it stopped.
Okay. And I had a question about when the Mysore colony came up because I have family
I
who live
have
there.
that date parked somewhere.
Okay.
I will look that up. If you can just note down who it is, I can look up that date and we can
No, that's me.
tell them.
That was my question.
Okay, then I will tell you. I have a newspaper clipping about Mysore
Okay.
colony itself, so I'll tell you that.
Okay.
So I have little things to add that in 1954, Shell Colony was established, very
Yes,
big colony, and that was inaugurated by Jawaharlal Nehru for the people of
Burma Shell.
refineries, Burma Shell. But they, because it was very long, they have handed over to Housing Board, and now
Yes.
it is redeveloped. That is the thing. Then the second thing is my grandfather, Mr. Jagannath Sakaram Gurjar, was salt commissioner here from 1930 to 1935,
Wow.
and his office was there near Fine Art, near that registration office. When I entered Mumbai in 1977, my auntie showed me, but I don't have any proof about that.
But thanks for sharing that. I did not know that there was such an
Yeah,
office
yeah,
over there. Thank you.
yeah. And then he was transferred to Nagpur and retired there. So he was granted a degree of Rao Bahadur by
Wow.
the English, because of that. So he was salt commissioner for 3 years or something. That is what my auntie told me.
Well, that's a
There was a
very, very
name.
interesting
There
fact.
was a
Thank you.
nameplate also. We have seen in
Oh,
80, in 81, 82s, but right now, unfortunately, we
We
don't.
don't have any proof.
but thank you for sharing that. It's a
Yeah,
good fact to keep handy.
yeah. Okay.
Thanks, Rohan.
Thanks.
Very
It was a
interesting.
very interesting program, otherwise.
So I was asking again same this what are the famous food shops are there because when we talk about dal pakwan then water come in mouth, so want to know what are the famous eateries like Jhamba and other places.
See, I'll tell you what, I rarely eat out in Chembur because I have the best of both worlds at home of a North Indian father and a South Indian mother. So I get all the food that I need at home. But the most popular, I believe you have Wigs in Chembur Camp, which is quite popular for dal pakwan. Honestly, though, it's the houses where you'll get the most authentic food, not these restaurants.
Okay, thank you very much, thank you.
Go for
Dr.
it.
Salim Ali, yes.
Yes.
Dr. Salim Ali, he writes about Chembur actually in his autobiography of, the sound of the magpie robin in the morning that used to wake him up. And he's identified a couple of species of birds that were very popular were very common in Chembur. And the first time we did a history walk in Chembur in November of 21, we had an ornithologist with us,
Oh,
coincidentally. She identified all of those species in the 1.5 hours of the walk. So
wow.
despite all the development, those birds are still there.
There was the golf club came up in 1927.
Yes,
So
it
next
it
year
originally
it
came up in
completes.
Shivdi.
Yeah, but 1927 is what it came up in Chembur, isn't it? As
1937 in Chembur.
Is it? I thought it was
Yes.
27.
So
Because, and
27.
the refugee barracks which were there were vacated, and the golf pros claimed that this land belonged to them.
It did indeed belong to them.
Yeah, and
Uh,
then Morarji Desai was the chief minister at that time. He made a survey of the area, and he said nothing doing. This will be there.
with
All
the
the
government
buildings
for the
came up.
refugees.
Yeah, the 34 buildings which came up were part of the compensation that people got, and those who didn't leave behind the property in Karachi or in Pakistan, they had to pay 4,500 for that unit. Okay, so I'm from the family who came from Karachi,
Oh,
and this is what it is. And now, of course, they've all been redeveloped one by one. So I, though the golf course thing doesn't quite gel with the, I thought that these Goras were part of the staff of Shell and Esso. And for their recreation, they had set up the golf
this
course.
predates the. So the golf course was created in Shivdi way before it came to Chembur, and they wanted a larger space. The land that then became the golf course actually belonged to the St. Anthony's Society. And
Ah,
it was fallow land because they had planned an agro-industrial estate over there that did not take off. So then in
okay.
the 30s, the Shivdi Club exchanged that land in return for the money that the St. Anthony's Society needed. And that's how it came to Chembur.
I see.
And then a part of it was requisitioned for the soldiers' barracks in the Second World War, which was to be handed back. But like you said, Morarji Desai then came in and said that we want to
Yeah.
retain it for the refugees' rehabilitation.
Yeah, yeah. And you had mentioned about that hill. So I was part of a shooting that took place on the hill, the Trombe Hill, with Hani Irani and Daisy Irani. So,
Wow.
Tare Zameen Ke. Yeah, so I was part of the shooting that took place. And of course, I have also been involved in shooting various other small little roles that were there. Okay. All right.
Very
Thank
Thank
nice
you.
to
you.
know.
Thank you. Thank you for all that.
To Miss Sumati's query, Ahobel Amat came up in the 1960s, mid 60s. I unfortunately have not found much data about Saras Bagh. I can see Union Park's clips about Union Park, but nothing really about Saras Bagh. So if anybody has more info, it'll be.
I'll add because my son used to go to his teacher over there. And that's what I heard. If I'm wrong, please correct me. Is that we saw that movie about the atomic bomb and uh, how they wanted to get the scientists back from US. So this
Hmm.
is one way they had got because they couldn't pay them back. So they got this land and they built houses and they built bungalows over there for the nuclear scientists
Oh,
and they housed them in Saras Park. This is please correct me if this story is wrong, but that's what I got to hear because the teacher said her husband, her father-in-law, they're all scientists from BRC, and the top
I didn't know
scientists
that.
there,
I
they were
should check.
lured, yeah, they were lured back, like because they couldn't compensate in money, so they were given other compensations to get them back and hold them back over here.
That's an
Okay.
interesting fact. I'll look
Yeah.
into it also.
I just read in 80s that one article has come about Sarasbag. These people, I think they have taken a plot near that Trombe. So for a security purpose, the government did not allow them to build the bungalows, and they were given alternate plot here, this Sarasbag. That's what it has come in that time paper. One article had come. That's what I want to share. Okay,
I
thank
will
you very
look
much.
that up. Thank you.
Thank
Yeah.
you so much. And thank you, Rohan, for
1980s it has come. It is somewhere, I don't remember the date. Exact
I'll
year,
look that up.
19. Yeah.
Anyway,
Thank
thank you, Rohan, for this really most interesting talk. And thank you, everybody else, for sharing all the memories and all the tidbits of information that you guys have. It's really wonderful. This is great community. So thank you so much for doing that as well and for coming for our talk. And we hope to see you at many others. Thanks so much and good night.
Thank you, everyone.